Welcome to What Is It About the Weather? Where weather is always our theme, but your weather, my weather, we're really not going to get into that much detail. This week, we're going to talk about a world without snow, kind of counter to last week, where we were focused on all the wonderful things about snow. This week, we're going to be imagining a world that had no snow. But before we get into that, let me just say that I hope you've had a interesting and enjoyable holiday season for those that are celebrating, and that maybe some positive weather intertwining events took place and all that. At a minimum, I hope that you were able to spend time with folks you care about and have a joyous holiday season. Since we last talked, I know I've gotten some. I don't know that I got any weather specific gifts this Christmas. I got some stuff that definitely I could use for weather-related things, some camera stuff, but I was just trying to think. No, I don't think so. I'll have to maybe make sure that's on my list every year, at least one specific weather-related item. But in reading and researching for this week's episode, I got just distracted in all sorts of things, some weather-related and some not. For instance, I ended up looking at the Macintosh raincoat. So it's believed to be the first commercially produced raincoat, and kind of the life cycle of this company that, as with a lot of things, had been around a long time, almost went out of business, and interestingly enough was bought by a Japanese company and had a resurgence and is now reestablished. We'll probably do a episode. I mean, that's kind of a tech and, kind of an old school tech, kind of like the umbrella was. Something we probably should dive into sometime. And then, of course, I was doing non-weather things. For some reason, and I don't remember what I was looking into, got off on leap years and that sort of thing. And specifically, though, this year we have a leap second. And, that just has to do with the fact that the Earth, our rotation is changing. So when you think about leap years, ordinarily what we're really dealing with is the fact that the Earth it's not precisely 365 days of which we go around the sun, right? So we have these leap years to make up for that difference, that it's not a precise thing. And we have the same thing with the Earth's rotation that's changing slowly over time. So occasionally we have these leap seconds to make up that difference. And we're going to have one of those each year. I didn't read exactly what it takes place, but I hope the weather forecast that are coming out for that day really take into account that extra second. That could be pivotal and accurate weather forecast, I'm sure. And then, of course, the last thing, because I was reading about snow, was this estimate. And while I couldn't find if this was actually researched or published, there's somebody who's spent a lot of time looking at snow and snowflakes, another person involved in that, whose estimate of 1 quadrillion, I think is what the number was. So 1 with 15 zeros after it, cubic feet of snowfall each year around the globe. That's a lot of snow. And for the metric folks, that's, I think it was trillion. Is it trillion? Yeah, I think it was. Yeah, so trillion. 28 trillion cubic meters. And anyway you slice it, that's a lot of snow each year. But can you imagine? Can you imagine if we never had any? If the Earth was void of snow? None whatsoever. Just ponder that. So, and we're going to dig it in a little deeper than just snow. So any frozen water. So no ice, no snow. Now we're going to start with the snow, but we'll get into the ice and why that whole thing is important here in a minute. So let's dive into our main topic, imagining a world without snow. Now, after last week's episode, I hope you're actually, in that snow mood, and that for those who had a white Christmas or who are getting snow this time of year are enjoying it. For anybody that hasn't, before I get into this imagining a world without it, let me say I highly recommend spending some time in the snow. I know I've gone to school with folks who live in regions that, snow's just not a natural occurrence, and have certainly met plenty of people around the world, people that, kind of stay in areas they grew up in, even parts of, let's say, Southern California, or live in Florida here in the U.S., but certainly anywhere in the tropical belt. Now, there are places even in the tropics that do get snow, but they tend to be, of course, higher elevations. And again, for anybody that's never experienced snow, I recommend that you plan a trip to do it at least one time. Because snow, it's not just, yeah, you can see pictures. It's kind of like even going out in the rain. If you're not in an area where you experience snow, hopefully you get rain. I know there's some people in arid areas that don't get much of either, but hopefully you're getting one of these two things. And you know how different the experience is, how tactile it can be when you're out in it, and you're getting these touch senses, and whether it's rain falling off you or in this case snow. But the whole concept of snow, because you can be standing there, your hand stretched out, and a snowflake falls on your hand, and you get to experience the beauty of the snowflake, if it's a big flake, and then the whole sensing change in temperature as that snowflake melts. So it's just a complete sense exposure. And I talked about last time about how in a big snowstorm, not even necessarily a blizzard or anything, but when there's enough snow falling, how it changes the acoustics. So you get this kind of broad sense experience. And again, I highly recommend it for anybody who's never experienced snow. Make sure it's on your bucket list to go out and enjoy a snow experience at least once in your life. For those that do experience snow, we talked about it last week. Just imagine if you never had snow days or never had snow at all in your life. Now, there are certainly some people that probably live in areas where they say, oh, I would love a life without snow. But I'm guessing that most of those people, if they left areas with snow, they would find their body craving it. Of course, there's always a few exceptions. I'm sure there's some people that have spent enough time in the snow in their life where they want to leave. I can't imagine being one of those people. I know people say, well, you don't live in it. Well, I did live in upstate New York, and I know lake effect snows, and I know a lot of snows, and I enjoy that. So I think of it as a positive things. I mean, can you imagine a world without the Winter Olympics? I know not all of us get to ski. I mean, I love to ski. It's one of those things where I truly feel, I don't know, just alive when I'm doing it. I love the speed. I love the being outdoors, the crisp temperatures, that sort of thing. But no Winter Olympics? I mean, just think of all the sports that are in the Winter Olympics that couldn't exist without snow and or ice. I don't know what we'd be left with. Not much. I mean, everything really is built around the fact that we have this frozen water, the existence of frozen water. Yeah, you could do ski jumps with this artificial grass, and I'm guessing you could do some sort of rollerblade hockey, and we could do it in the wintertime and call it the Winter Olympics, but I don't think somehow it would be the same. Or could you imagine, I mean, for instance, Christmas without snow? All the marketing and everything that's so focused around winter weather. Now, I know a lot of people, as we've discussed many times, don't get to experience all these different weather phenomena in the same degree as others. But holidays always in the marketing take advantage of some of these more traditional changes in the four seasons. I mean, spring and Easter time, taking advantage of the flowering part of the year, or Thanksgiving here in the U.S., or Halloween, or other fall holidays that take advantage of the changing of fall colors. And certainly Christmas time and other winter holidays tend to leverage snow. I mean, again, even in my time in Chile, it was kind of odd that all these snowflakes went up and everything like that. But I think people got the idea, and somehow maybe it made them feel a little cooler when it was 95 Fahrenheit outside on a Christmas day or something. So we have all these things where it's part of our existence. Now, you could easily argue that a lot of these things we could live without. Would the world stop if we didn't have snowflakes for marketing? No. Would the world end if we didn't have snow days? No, of course not. Would life be so horrible if we didn't have the Winter Olympics or winter sports? Well, I think so, but I'm sure we would figure out ways to adapt. But there are some things, when you think about it, would be drastically different. And you might even have to ask yourself, would the Industrial Revolution have happened? How would humanity be different today if there was no snow and or ice? And let's start with still focusing on the snow element and just think about the natural world a little bit. So agriculture. If we didn't have areas where snow covered the earth and did a spring melt in this process of slowly saturating the ground, and it occurred on a regular basis because it, of course, doesn't always happen the same every year, the whole concept of crops we create and enjoy and eat and feed us and keep us alive would be drastically different. Again, is snow critical for every one of those crops? No. But does it have something to do with a variety of crops that we are able to grow because of snowmelts that occur every year? And for that matter, water supplies. I mean, the western U.S. is a classic example of this, but it's certainly not the only area where many of the river basins, whether it's in the northwestern U.S., like the Columbia River Basin, or the Colorado River that goes down all the way into Southern California, these basins are driven by frozen precipitation occurring each year and then gradually dissipating over the course of a season. And if all this fell as rain, the structure of these basins would be drastically different. Or even if you think about the flora and fauna aspect and angle, imagine a world without polar bears or penguins. Yeah, could we get by? No snow leopards, those sort of things. We might get by. But it would drastically have changed how humans interact with the flora and fauna around them. Annual freezes or freezing events to kill off insects or that sort of thing in different parts of the world are critical. And the makeup of our world would be drastically different if we didn't have this natural cycle that generally occurred on an annual basis. Now, if we step for a moment and say, let's think about this in a broader envelope. You know, we've talked about the natural world, and snow certainly impacts that. But let's say that we really didn't know freezing water. So imagine no ice at all, right? That's where we need to get to. You know, on Earth, we're kind of unique in that as a planet, we experience naturally all three phases of water. So vapor, liquid, and frozen. But can you imagine, just imagine for a moment, if naturally on this planet we didn't experience that third element, right? That we didn't know what it was like when water took on a solid form. Yeah, we might appreciate things being slightly cooler in some areas or warmer in others, but just imagine if mentally, frozen precipitation or frozen water didn't exist. So we had no mental capacity to appreciate that it even occurred. And yeah, I know that's taken a little bit of a step, but fundamentally, so often people think about ice, right? You don't realize how often you're thinking about ice, but you do all the time. And we get into this whole idea of how important fire was to, our survival and being able to cook things. But you can throw the flip side of that is, what if we couldn't freeze things? Now, I know we haven't always had refrigerators, but for a very long time, we have been using cold and particularly ice and frozen water, snow and ice, to keep things cool, right? Or at a stable temperature. I mean, we can get into the whole dynamics of snow as an insulator. I probably should have done that back in the agriculture section. I could probably almost do a whole podcast on it'd probably bore everybody to death if I did that. But if we step back for a moment and we say, okay, mentally, we never had this concept of keeping things frozen or even cool because there wasn't this phase change. So would we have somehow never proceeded in the same way if we could not appreciate how cooling things and or freezing things impacted their ability to be preserved? Now, clearly, this probably would have had a major impact on whether refrigeration as we know it, and again, that's cooling and or freezing, may have never even happened. And, it's easy to say, we would have gotten by, and we would have. Sure, we would have. But step back for a moment and imagine a world without a refrigerator at all. And there are parts of this world that hardly know them still today. But it's been quintessential in so many things that have happened, from how medicine has evolved and our ability to keep critical medicines and vaccines in a cooled state, and even how medicine will move forward with cryogenic freezing and things of that nature as we're going to continue to evolve in these areas of life preservation. Now, you could argue maybe we don't need to do that, but certainly where we've gotten to today has been impacted by humanity's ability to be vaccinated. This simply that way, or to treat certain medicines with certain illnesses with certain medicines. But it's certainly beyond just medicine, and even in how we, as I talked about initially with the food, if you step back for a moment and imagine a world where there was no refrigeration, no freezing. Now, we would still have the ability to can things and to cure things, even certain meats. But without the ability to refrigerate, first and foremost, and then to transport via refrigeration, okay, which is even a more recent ability, let's say in the last couple hundred years, we would drastically impact how we look today without that capability. So just imagine if a train couldn't take frozen goods to certain areas, okay? Or you couldn't even chill food or preserve significant amounts of food. Yes, you could still do canning and that sort of thing, but how much canning can you do? And also, you fundamentally change the flavors of food when you do that. But if we didn't have this capability to preserve, we would spend so much more time still each day in food acquisition and preparation if we weren't able to preserve foods in any way. So if you take all that time that's available, that's allowed us to do other things, it's vanished. And even how we've settled in different areas, and I read an example about this, the idea of Dallas, Texas, or the area of Dallas, Texas here in the U.S., big major city, right? It probably could not exist today without the ability we had of transporting frozen or cooled meats and foods, because it wasn't on a big river. And even like the area I live in Atlanta, now Atlanta's close enough, a little different to some other areas that are on bigger rivers or closer to hubs, even the ocean, but still. So that kind of internal area in Dallas, Texas was far enough from the ocean, although you could argue it's, again, similar to Atlanta. It's somewhat close to Houston and other areas along the coast, but you have to question whether it would have evolved to what it is without the ability to have this preservation method of most of the food that we consume. Now, that cycle has helped us to change how we migrate and move around and live. But without it, there's a lot of questions whether we'd ever moved away from coastal areas or coastal areas very close to a river basin where there could be quick transport. But again, I get back to this whole idea of where would our time be spent if so much of it had to be spent on food and acquisition? Again, could we have learned that maybe digging up the earth and storing things underground, it was cold enough? We might have, but the instinct, I would argue that the instinct wouldn't have been there to even think about that if we didn't have frozen water on this planet, hadn't experienced it. Heck, if it was even just in areas like near the poles, we may have never gotten around to seeing it, but having it fall from the sky and on an annual basis remind us of what it does, we may have never absorbed what it can do for us. So I would tell you that there's more to snow and ice than just getting a little cold or winter sports or snowball fights or snow days, whatever it might be. There's a variety of ways in which snow and ice have fundamentally shaped how humanity has moved into the Industrial Revolution, how we got out of being just located along coastal areas and were able to explore and settle in interior parts of these large land masses we live on because of our ability to preserve and benefit from a water delivery mechanism that is not simply a river and doesn't dissipate immediately as things get warmer. So, as we end 2016, be appreciative of a great many things. Be appreciative of friends and family, a good job, laughing, smiling, all those things. But also be appreciative of snow and what the frozen precip and frozen water bring to us and allow us to have. All right, enough about snow. I know you're probably tired of hearing me talk about it, but I just love me a good snow. And, I have a hard time imagining a world without it. I do think, it would have been quite a big thing that would have been different for us had we lived in a world where it wasn't available to us. An interesting tidbit to throw on top of that, though, is as I was reading and researching and investigating for this episode was, what if ice was dense and didn't float? Now, I know we'd have to fundamentally change the physics of things to make that happen, but can you imagine how different the world would be? And scientifically, kind of like not having snow and ice, if frozen water didn't float, we'd have very shallow oceans and much different dynamics of even subsoil, that oil may have never happened the way it has taken place, that the way oceans shape our weather and climate wouldn't happen in the same way. Heck, even the way tsunamis do and don't occur would be very different if dense frozen water didn't float. If it was denser, I should say. Dense frozen water. I'm not even making any sense to myself, but if water in a frozen form was more dense, it didn't float. So I'll put a link in the show notes where you can read through an interesting list that someone made about those things. Any case, here we are. We're wrapping up 2016. I hope you've had a good year. I know it's been an interesting year for me. Heck, getting to start this podcast, do some new things. It's been a fun thing to do, and so we will try to keep it going in 2017. But as I said earlier in the podcast, I hope you've had an enjoyable year. And I hope in some ways that you've had an interesting and enjoyable and intertwined weather world, that weather's not been too much of a problem for you or created too much angst in your life. And that as we move into 2017, that you, maybe can look at weather a little differently and appreciate it in some ways that you might not have before. So with this last episode of the year, let me just wish you a happy new year wherever you are in the world. And may 2017 bring you an weather intertwined world, because, we all know there's much more weather than weather itself. Now, that doesn't let you off the hook or anything. When it comes to RSVP, I'm going to hit you with this end of your rate, share, validate, and pledge. I won't dwell on it because I did last week. You know the drill. Take some time. Do it. And as I said before, if you enjoy other podcasts more, take care of them too. That's what's most important, is letting people know you appreciate what they're doing. Help them out with thoughts, ideas, what they can do, and just enjoy podcasting and your podcast that you listen to as you head into the new year. So hook up with me on email, of course, whatisitabouttheweather@gmail.com, or whatisitabouttheweather.com website, where you can go to the contact form. You can learn more about how to follow, my stuff if you want to do that directly, whether it's connecting with me on Twitter and Instagram at Mark_Jelinek, Jelinek, or just following the Twitter feed for the show, just to get announcements of new episodes or whatever it might be. So I will wish you a fair weather new year, and we'll see you in 2017.